will leave us with what I believe the biggest problem, and that is, what do you do with 1 million people in Canada who have no path to permanent residence?
Phil Mooney, who's been, in the business for over 2 decades, 25 years now, and you've had 30 years, 3 decades of corporate experience, and you've seen, prime ministers come and go, you've seen immigration ministers come and go, governments change, everything has happened. What motivates you to still continue in immigration till date?
The sad part is that IRCC's search engine is the worst thing in the world.
If there is a change of government, if the Conservatives come into power, and because you've seen, change of governments, if the Conservatives get into power, what kind of changes can one expect with regards to immigration?
When I first started this business, the number of different processes that we could offer people to immigrate to Canada was probably 1/10 of the number of different programs that we have now.
So what keeps Phil Mooney up at night?
Because I took a risk because I wanted the money. Yeah. Big factor was the problems in India.
When you go to office today in 2024 versus when you went to office in 1999, what has been the drastic change in terms of maybe a process, could be kind of clients?
I got 200 calls.
Oh, that's nice.
And, it was a great way to learn the business, to answer questions. When I started the immigration business, my wife came to my office. This is really nice. Now, where's the money?
Yeah.
Okay.
So guys, our guest tonight is no less than a living legend in the Canadian immigration industry landscape. He is a senior counsel and a senior immigration practitioner, specifically in the Canadian immigration industry. He served as the first CEO of ICCRC, which was the regulatory body of Canadian immigration consultants here in Canada. Thereafter, he served as a director as well for ICCRC for a couple of years. He was the president of CAPIC, the Association of Consultants here in Canada, and he also served as the advisory member of the committee for CBSA. Apart from presenting several reports to the Senate Committee on Canadian Immigration in the House of Commons, the list of his contributions to the Canadian immigration industry goes on. Guys, our guest tonight is Mr. Phil Mooney on the podcast. And because Mr. Phil Mooney has several years of experience in Canadian immigration, it only makes sense to talk about the history of Canadian immigration. Also, the evolution of that, the history of Canadian immigration to the upcoming future in probably 2025, 2030, whatever it may be. Guys, Canadian immigration is severely impacted by the socio-economic factors here in Canada. Today, we're talking about recession, inflation. We're talking about all the factors, including politics, general elections upcoming next year, conservatives, liberals. So we will talk about how immigration of Canada is going to shape up in the coming few years. That exactly is going to be the main flavor of the conversation today. Guys, Mr. Phil Mooney on the podcast tonight. Phil, thanks for coming in, and I welcome you to the podcast. How are you?
I'm doing just fine, thank you.
Perfect, great. And, it's lovely to have you here. And, I thought maybe it'll be hard to get you over here, but you were kind enough and humble enough to, join us on our session today.
No, happy to join you.
Perfect. So, Phil, first things off, you've been in the industry for over 25 years, and so first of all, congratulations. And,
yes, thank you.
Yeah, and like you said, this week marks 25 years of you being in the industry.
Right.
But you've been an immigrant by blood, your entire line of parents and your wife. So can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, sure. I was actually born in Canada, out in Saskatchewan, but my father came to Canada from Ireland as an immigrant way back in 1928.
Perfect.
And he met my mother, who was an orphan, who came up from the United States when she was 17.
Yeah.
They met in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, got married, and over the next 20 years had 13 children.
13 children.
I was number 12. Okay. And unfortunately, my father passed away just before my younger sister was born.
Okay.
And that was way back in 1952.
Okay.
So I grew up in Saskatchewan, went to school. We were poor.
Okay.
But we lived in a part of the country that had the benefit of the first ever socialist government in Canada or the U.S.
Yeah.
and the government brought in Medicare and other benefits so that my mother, who was an incredible lady, was able to keep most of the family together.
Yeah.
I went to university at the University of Saskatchewan, but prior to my third year, I had to pay my own way through college. There just was no other money anywhere.
Yeah.
But prior to my third year, there was no work. So I started working in a warehouse for Quaker Oats, loading boxcars and semi-trailers, and got married. And before I turned 21, I had 2 babies and a daughter. And a wife.
Yeah.
My wife had come from Germany in 1964 with her mother. And I didn't know what to do after a year and a half of working in a warehouse when the guys I worked with after my second son was born said, "Oh, we can see you here 20 years from now.
Yeah.
Showing your sons how to work and load a boxcar." And I thought, no, I can't.
Yeah.
I had been going to night school, trying to find a way to finish my degree. And someone came along and offered me a job selling life insurance and just told me that if I spent 6 months working as a life insurance agent, it would be better than finishing my degree.
Yeah.
Well, as it turned out, they were right. Now it lasted 8 or 9 months. But then I got a job working for a chemical company. I spent a couple of years with them, and then was recruited by other companies. Had basically as a salesman, and then I got in with a company that was owned by Molson's, the Canadian
I love the
beer company. Yes. And I started with them in Winnipeg and became a supervisor. I got transferred to London, Ontario, and after 7 years into Burlington, Ontario. And I spent 25 years with the company. I ended up as one of their corporate executives. I had responsibilities in sales, marketing. At one point, I had 700 people working for me.
Okay.
But after about 25 years, like most companies, they went for younger people. And I had a nice package when I left them. They wanted me to move to Holland, but I didn't want to because we were then bought by Unilever, which is a big company, a chemical company.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to move at all. And it was a good thing. I left and started looking for other work. And about the same time, my one of my sons, who was married at the time, announced that they were having kids. So I went from traveling the whole world basically to being a grandfather. And that's been one of the major benefits. I didn't have to travel much. I could be there for all of their birthdays and other good events.
Yeah.
But someone offered me a job. I had chances to go with other corporations and travel and do all that. But I was offered a job basically starting my own franchise, if you will, doing immigration business.
Oh.
And it was immigration to the U.S.
Okay. This is 1999. Right?
This is 99, and I had to set up my own office in the Toronto area. It was a French company out of Quebec.
Okay.
And they had few English people working for them.
Okay.
But they showed me how to do U.S. immigration, and over the next few years, none of this, we weren't regulated at the time. So I learned how to do U.S. immigration, especially business immigration. And then we got more and more inquiries about Canadian immigration. So I studied Canadian immigration. The company hired a Canadian immigration lawyer who showed me the ropes. And after a year or so, I was basically providing the lawyer with how to do Canadian immigration. And then started doing more and more Canadian immigration as opposed to just U.S. Eventually went on my own because the company I was with, they just didn't want to do any Canadian immigration. But I've retained relationships with them over the last 25 years on the U.S. side. And around 2004, 2005, I had been doing quite well as a immigration consultant.
Okay.
We weren't regulated, so there were no standards about anything. But I did know that there were a whole lot of people trying to do stuff that weren't right. And I would get lots of calls from people who were not treated properly.
Okay.
So I would help them with their applications. And then we got word that the profession would be regulated. This is after, in 2001, the Mangat decision came down. The Supreme Court of Canada made a decision after the Law Society of British Columbia sued an immigration consultant for practicing law without a license. The case ultimately went to the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court said no, it was okay for immigration consultants to do immigration as long as they were regulated.
Okay.
So 2004, 2005, we were getting organized, and they were starting regulate, coming out with the rules about regulation. And finally, in 2006, the first regulator of immigration consultants was set up, called CSIC, CSIC, and we were all keen on being regulated and making it a profession. But we turned out to have some very mixed results from our regulator, who were surprised in the early days when only 700 or 800 people actually applied.
Okay.
When there were 5,000 or 6,000 initially interested.
Oh.
And of those 700 or 800, the regulator and the people running it had spent a lot of money getting ready. They had offices on Bay Street in Toronto. They hired a lot of people, and they frankly didn't have enough money. So the first thing they did was raise fees and started collecting a lot of money from the members without providing any services. And they were being run by people who did not appreciate criticism or complaints. I had volunteered with the association, the Consultants Association called CAPIC, Canadian Association of Professional Immigration Consultants. And as a volunteer, I was helping them set up events and seminars and things like that. And then I ran for president of the association, but nobody else did. So I got to be president. At that same time, the regulator began to be far more abusive.
Okay.
So we ended up in quite a long and extended battle with the regulator, who tried to take advantage of their position to make a lot of money for the directors who were in it.
Okay.
Who used the complaints and discipline process to go after their critics.
Okay.
So we ended up lobbying the government, and it took some time. But in 2010, the minister at the time, Jason Kenney, decided that he had enough of the previous regulator, and so he didn't have the authority actually to change regulatory bodies. So he went out and put the whole process in as a bid.
Okay.
He said groups could bid on becoming the new regulator of immigration consultants.
Okay.
The previous regulator just said, well, we're doing a great job, so we're going to keep doing it. But our association put together a real great team of volunteers. And as head of the organization, I led the bid process with a couple of other consultants and about 50 volunteers. And we put together a bid based on what we thought would be good for our profession. And in 2011, we won. It was
ICCRC came in.
Yeah, and in July of 2011, the government awarded the regulatory, became the immigration ICCRC. Sorry, a lot of abbreviations have gone on.
Yeah.
We became the new regulator of immigration consultants.
Yeah.
Now, we got exactly nothing from the previous regulator. Not a name, no one who was under any sort of investigation, no complaints, no resources, no assets. The government gave us a loan of $500,000 to get started, but it was a loan.
Okay.
And at the same time, a couple of other things happened on July 1st of that year. The minister said, consultants have had a bad time of it. They've had to pay up to $7,000 to $8,000 each for their membership every year back then, and had very poor representation, et cetera, and not a fair process at all. So the minister said, just as a reward for the consultants sticking with it, he gave them a 6-month holiday on membership fees.
Okay.
I was head of the new consultant body. I mean,
The new regulator.
the new regulatory body, and what he basically did was give away my first 6 months of budget. So we had to really scramble to hire people and put the process in place. But again, the volunteers helped a lot, and the directors we had, and they all helped and pitched in, and it was a great effort. And ultimately, we had this set up and running. The idea being that we wanted to make sure that the consultants were shown what the right way was to do things before they were held accountable. In the previous regulator, they would fine us for not having a good retainer agreement, but they never told us what had to be in one.
Okay.
They would fine us if we didn't appropriate or use the client's money properly, but didn't tell us what a trust account should be.
Okay.
And so all of these things, we made a commitment to all the members that said, look, we'll do everything we can to give you the rules. We'll train you for free. So we set up the principle of practice management education, where there's 10 or 15 courses that every consultant now has to go through, but they're free.
Yeah.
And they're designed to say, here's what you need to do as an immigration consultant to protect the consumers.
Okay.
So that went and was very well received, and our membership fees went from like $7,000 a year to $2,000.
Yeah.
And have stayed at a very low level. After a year and a half or so, my promise to the organization was that I would help set it up. My business experience came in handy.
Yeah.
I had been 25 years, 30 years in the corporate world, and I knew how to manage a business.
Yeah.
Whereas many of the other people I worked with were very good consultants, and they came from different professions, but they hadn't run the business.
Yeah.
So I helped set up the whole business, and after a year, I said, "That's it." Two things. I didn't want to be in charge of everything anymore because I'd had 700 people working for me, and I was looking forward to going back to just being myself and running my own practice. And they couldn't afford me. The volunteering cost a lot of money over those years, but it was well worth it. Okay, and it was great times. After a year or so, I ran and became one of the directors. We had some issues with certain people there. So just to stabilize the business, I was a director for a couple of years. Then I went back to my practice. And what happened after the next year or two, I got involved in very many different things and running my own practice and looking after things. But I was also getting older.
Yeah.
Okay. And what was it, 2014, I turned 65. Okay. And I thought, well, I should start thinking about retirement.
Yeah.
And my wife wanted to travel and do all these great things. So I started slowing down my practice, and over the next 2 or 3 years, I turned over most of my clients. But then some of those people I turned over the business to, I turned over some business clients, and they needed help. So I said, okay, I'll help you with the business clients, and we can share the fees. And a few more people asked me for help, and I had 7 or 8 people helping. So then I put out a little newsletter, so I didn't have to repeat myself.
Yeah.
Well, the next thing you know, I had 50 people, and then 100 people, and now I have over 350 people in my newsletter that are all representatives who need co-counseling help. So I ended up being busier than ever. Okay. But instead of doing the files myself, I now co-counsel. I make sure the idea is these are people who are they're experienced in immigration. They've had a year or two in the business, but they get a lead, and someone calls them and says, "I want to come to Canada." But they don't say how. Yeah. And of course, it's because the people don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
So after my associates, they'll say, okay, well, do you qualify? Are you married to a Canadian? What's your education? How old are you? And they see if there's a program that they qualify for, and it turns out that for many of them, they don't.
They don't. Yeah.
They might have an excellent education. They might speak English perfectly well. They might have done a great job and have a good career, but they're 45.
Yeah.
And under Express Entry, the whole system is focused on young people.
Yeah.
So they have money, all right? So now they're saying, I've got money, I want to come to Canada,
yeah,
and I really want to immigrate to Canada. So business immigration becomes their only pathway,
yeah,
because of the way the system is set up.
Yeah.
And many of our members hadn't done business immigration, and some of them have been around 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. They just never did it.
Yeah.
So co-counseling gives them a way to instead of just turning over the client to somebody else, our code of ethics says you can't take money from people if you don't know how to do the file.
Correct.
Or you can co-counsel. So I've started up co-counseling for the last 5 or 6 years. But then as I got busier and busier, I realized I'm really not getting any closer to being able to retire.
Yeah.
So I've combined now and got together with a couple of people to basically expand co-counseling into more areas of immigration.
Okay.
So that an immigration consultant who's focused and getting started and then gets their business running and becomes very good at a certain part of business, but then wants to expand because the markets change, and they want to expand. All of them share the belief that they need to know how to do the file before they accept money.
Yeah.
And they don't feel comfortable with complex files or even a different file on the first couple.
Yeah.
So we've set up a business called IMMC3, Immigration ICCR3. Anyway, IMMC3, Immigration Consultants Co-Counseling Collaborative.
Yeah.
So that we now have a team of about 10 senior consultants, all subject matter experts,
Yeah.
who can help with a variety of different areas of the business. And we've set up a website, immc3.ca. And we're just rolling it out now to the people who want help with refugees or H&C or LMIAs,
Yeah.
things that I was only doing business immigration,
Yeah.
but now they do all of it. And so that's still keeping me really busy.
Yeah.
And my wife is still asking me, when are you going to
retire?
travel and retire? And so I think I'm finally on the way now to do that. But in the meantime, I also get very involved in policy.
Yeah.
As the head of the Consultants Association and later as head of the regulatory body, I had access to people in the department and to the minister. And there were often times we met to talk about policy and about programs. The idea being helping Canada develop programs that better meet their needs.
Okay.
Because immigration is a very big business. It's a complex business. Everyone has opinions, but there are only two groups who actually understand how the system works.
Correct.
One of those is the department, not the minister and not the minister's staff. It's the department knows how things work. Mm-hmm. The other one are authorized representatives, lawyers and consultants who practice immigration full time. They know how the system works. So they and immigration consultants they're like a great check, if you will, for the department to help develop programs. And we've been involved in many of them. And even in the last few years, I work with our association, CAPIC, to submit policy papers and to bring in ideas that help the government work. And so we have a good understanding of that.
Yeah.
And so I get involved in a bunch of that stuff too. Okay, so that's sort of a very long history.
No,
okay?
but that's very interesting, and which keeps me, which brings me to a very important question that I wanted to ask you. That Phil Mooney, who's been, in the business for over 2 decades, 25 years now, and you've had 30 years, 3 decades of corporate experience, and you've seen, prime ministers come and go, you've seen immigration ministers come and go, governments change, everything has happened. What motivates you to still continue in immigration till date? You've been over 50 years.
Yeah. The first motivation is making a living.
Yeah.
One of the things when you grow up poor, and you have to going through school without some of the things that your friends and relatives have, is once you start working, and then you have a family, you have to meet your obligation to your family.
That's correct.
And being poor is no fun, but if you work hard and work smart, you can make a living. And then once you have dependents, the most important thing I've ever done is be a husband and a father. Okay. The most fun thing I've ever done is being a grandfather.
Yeah.
Right. So that's sort of some motivation. People said to me, well, why did you start doing your immigration consultant business any more than what did I start as doing sales? And the answer was I needed a job. Okay.
Yeah.
And once you're in it, you work hard and you can be successful. Now, the thing with immigration consulting, though, which has added to the story, if you will, is in when I worked in the chemical business in the corporate world, we sold chemicals that help dairies and laundries and restaurants get clean dishes and clothing and all this and protect the public so they don't get food poisoning, all that kind of stuff.
Correct.
That was great, but in the immigration business, you get the feel after a while that you're actually helping people realize their dreams, and you're watching families come to Canada because that's what they want to do. They achieve their dreams and they help Canada become a better country.
Correct.
So going through the process after, with this job, if you will, if you want to call it a job, and I call it's now a profession.
Yeah.
You're helping build this country. And that's a privilege, okay? And that's what I appreciate about doing the work.
Yeah.
And since I started in this business, it's never a dull moment.
Yeah.
The immigration business is complicated.
You always keep us on the toes.
It does. You can't, every case is different. Every person deserves your attention. And it becomes a habit in terms of trying to work ethically.
Yeah.
Because ethics are a key to our business.
Yeah.
When I started the immigration business, selling basically U.S. immigration to corporations, I thought it was going to be really easy because I'd been working with different companies, major international corporations, and I knew a lot of the people in the Toronto area. And so I would go and see them and I'd say, hey, I'm doing immigration now. And they would all say, great. We'd much rather deal with you than a lawyer because you take us to lunch, and other things. And I thought, this is great. This is really super. And I'd go back to my office and I'd call more people and we'd meet again. And after about a month and a half, my wife came to my office, and I had a nice office that was part of I had to have one as part of my franchise agreement, if you will. Mm-hmm. And she came to the office and said, this is really nice. Now, where's the money?
Yeah.
Okay. And I had to think about that. And I said, all these people really want the services, but they don't need anything right now.
Yeah.
So I had to change my whole marketing approach. And I put in an ad in the Globe and Mail, because in those days it was newspapers.
Yeah.
Okay. There was no social media, and I put in an ad in the Globe and Mail that cost me like $5,000 for a week.
That's a
It
bomb.
was just a little ad saying work permits to the USA, call me. I got 200 calls.
Oh, that's nice.
And, it was a great way to learn the business, to answer questions. If I didn't know something, I could call the people who hired me or set me up, and the lawyers would tell me what I could do. And I made a better deal with the Globe and Mail after 1 week to say, okay, I'll set in an annual contract. Mm-hmm. And after about 6 months, everything became referrals.
Okay.
Once you do a good job for people, they refer others to you.
Yeah.
And the same thing it has happened in our when I became more Canadian immigration. After 1 to 2 years, if you keep doing a good job, the referrals are all you need to do business.
That's correct.
And they're the best kind of business, because once someone is referred to you, you don't have any trouble. If you tell them what the fees are, that's what they pay. They don't try to get you to pay less. Now, if they don't have the money, then they'll tell you. All right, so you don't have to worry. You give them advice and let them go.
Yeah.
But knowing that they have a real need, and then you can meet that need, and as long as you work on their file ethically, by making sure you know what you're talking about, by telling them what is possible, and once they give you you agree to move forward, you complete the file properly, you meet deadlines, you put in the right amount of information, you address any issues, and on occasion, some of the frustrating parts are that the government and visa officers will make mistakes. So you have to know how to fight for your clients, how to do reconsideration requests, how, if necessary, to recommend good lawyers so that they can go to federal court, or how to reapply and get around the process. So, operating ethically means you put their interests first.
That's correct.
Running a good business means you charge enough for your work. And I've often talked to many of our members who don't know how to charge for their work.
Yeah.
So
that's also an art. And in fact, one of my clients taught me how to charge for. So I used to give out advice for free, right? Like in the beginning. And one of my clients from Pakistan, one of the viewers said, "What are you doing? Why don't you charge money? Like, I've been talking to you for the past 30 minutes and you've given me such good advice. Why don't you charge money?" I said, that's good. And then he said, and this is way back in 2019 now. He said, it was really hard to get through to you. I've been seeing your videos. I've been seeing everything. I can't seem to find your number. Why don't you flash your number on the screen? I said, it looks too commercial, it looks too wannabe. He said, but no, that's what you think. But you step into my shoes, I need help. Why don't you flash your number so that I can give you a call, I can send you a message, and then, I can, if I find it worth it, I would definitely pay for this. So I think, yes, experiences will teach you,
Well, you're right, especially the idea of returning calls and being reachable.
Yeah.
To me, I have always encouraged people to call me, making sure they had my phone number or my email address.
Yes.
And I try my best to answer every call. But the other thing I do that most consultants don't, and maybe it's because I had 30 years in the corporate world and a lot of experience as a salesman. And I was told by people in the business, because selling in the market that I had been in was a long time process and took a long time. And the time you spent with a client was so important that you had to make best use of it.
Yeah.
People said, well, look, if or maybe what I decided was, if somebody's willing to talk to me for half an hour, I'm pretty sure they're going to be my customer.
Yeah.
Unless they can't afford me or they don't, the problem can't be solved. And so I've never charged consulting fees.
Yeah.
Many of my associates do, but I used to get a call from people and they would say, I have a problem. And, I talked to two lawyers and they both wanted $200 to talk to me about this. And I paid the $200 and they couldn't give me an answer. So I said, well, good news is I'll do my best to give you an answer, but I won't charge you anything. I said, and they were actually very appreciative, and I've had a history of that. So between people calling and asking for advice, I've never charged. For other consultants calling me and asking for advice, I never charge to talk.
Yeah, that's me. So I've called you a couple of times. I've sent you so many emails. I've sent you, you've been very accessible. And the cases we did, let me tell you, one of the cases that we did, I'm not sure if you remember because you've done so many. So that specific case, nobody in the entire fraternity was able to give us an answer. And you were kind enough to scan that, give me a good advice, and then we worked together, and then we got it through. Across the industry, everybody said that it's not doable. Like, that's kudos to you, hats off to your knowledge. But,
well, thank you. And the secret of becoming an expert is to make a lot of mistakes.
Yes.
But luckily, if you're careful about what you do, and you work at it.
I think knowledge is really important. I've seen you go through the details to the bones, right? So
and experience helps. Even though every case is different, there does come a time when you feel that you can handle virtually any kind of a case and any kind of a problem. And if you don't know the answer right away, you know who to ask or where to look.
Yeah.
So I'm very happy when the internet came along and people would call me and ask me questions because I could go online and check do a little research while we were talking. And by the time we were finished, they thought I knew everything, so that's been a great help.
Yeah.
But most of the cases that we do, I find that especially when people call me with problems in a case, that I have to go right back and say, how did they begin this whole process? Because whenever I took a case, I made sure it was going to work.
Yeah.
And the only time we ever got refusals or problems with the case was when the government made a mistake and applied things. I could never, and I don't remember after many, many years, but it probably happened at some point, of actually not understanding everything about the process and being refused because you did something wrong.
Yeah.
Okay. If that ever happened, and maybe it did, I would always correct the problem for free.
Yeah.
Because your reputation is, you can only lose a reputation once.
Yeah.
But of all of those things, it's important that you learn and keep learning in our business.
Yeah.
It's important that you associate with others so that you can develop resources and trust others to do the kind of things that you don't know how to do.
Yeah.
And I guess my overall motivation is that at my age, I don't want to have problems sleeping at night because I took a risk because I wanted the money.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the last thing.
And so often when I talk to people first, I said, look, I'm not going to take any money from you until I know what to do.
Correct.
Then I'll charge a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't apologize for the fees that I do charge. And lots of times I joke with them that said, it's free to talk, but it's really expensive to deal with me, and people laugh. And then when I give them the quote, it's usually reasonable. But those are the kind of things, you learn as and maybe what a lot of our members who have trouble or they worry about negotiations, they have to learn how to sell.
Yeah.
I'm lucky in the fact that when I was 20, I started selling life insurance. I learned how to sell, and I'm sure made a lot of mistakes as I was young, and working on in the sales positions. You learn, and when you learn, the most important thing you learn is that you listening's more important than talking.
That's always the case.
And so once you learn how to really listen, it's a lot easier to sell. And especially when you understand what people need, if you can convince them that you have the answer to what they need, and if they have the opportunity to do what you're recommending they do, they're going to do it. Yeah. And as long as they can afford it,
That's true.
And at least if they can't afford it, you can help them by saying, this is the direction you need to go. If there's someone around who can do it for that fee, go to them, but don't trust people who want to take shortcuts. Don't believe everything you hear from people who are just saying, "Oh yeah, of course we can do that." Okay, but those are just some of the guidelines, and I've given seminars on how people should sell, or how they can make their practices work.
Interesting. So one of the key things that I wanted to know, because like I said, you've seen time pass by in terms of years of immigration. So when you go to office today in 2024 versus when you went to office in 1999, what has been the drastic change in terms of maybe a process, could be kind of clients. So what has been, if you could give me top three, like what are the top three changes that have shifted over time?
Well, for me, because I just do co-counseling now, I don't have deadlines to meet. That's really helpful because, sometimes you got to file a case and somebody's status expires at Tuesday at midnight, and you finally get there because you're so busy. You get there at 8 in the afternoon or in the evening. Nowadays, because it's all done under Greenwich time, you've got an hour and you got everything ready, and you go to file it, and the next thing you know, the system doesn't work. But even getting to that deadline, and it if some days, but there've been times I've been so busy, I've had to say to my wife, I can't work. I have to work this weekend. I can't go to dinner with you. I can't go to see the kids. I've got to get this finished. Well, I don't miss that at all, but that's one of the big differences. It's because I co-counsel with people who they have to do it. I don't have to do the forms, which
biggest pain in our life.
Well, I didn't mind doing forms so much because I'd always make sure you do it 2 or 3 times because I know that you're going to make a mistake. If you have 100 files, you're going to make 1 mistake or 2, and I hate making mistakes. So, I would always make sure I went through things over and over again, and I don't think I've ever sent in an application and had it back. Because there was a mistake made. But that's part of the things that I don't have to worry about anymore.
Correct.
But even more important now, because people rely on me to know how to do things, I don't remember how to fill in forms. So when we co-counsel with consultants who already know how to do the forms.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I did have an occasion when I first started co-counseling. I had a new consultant who, it was basically her first case, and she had a business case that I agreed to co-counsel with, and we qualified the person. They absolutely had the right things. And then when we were ready to get started, I explained, I said, here's the kind of information you have to gather. She gathered all the documents. And so she called me first thing in the morning. She said, okay, we've got everything now. What form do I use? And I said, well, you have to use the 5710 because okay. Then she called me back half an hour later and said, it says name. Should I put in the exact name or can I put in this name? And I can tell you, she asked me 20 or 30 times, called me about how to fill in the form. And that I know was a little frustrating, but the most important thing is I hadn't done any of these forms in a couple of years and I didn't want to make a mistake. Okay. So with co-counseling now, I insist that these people know how to do these forms. We do have some of our co-counsel, the senior subject matter experts, who can help someone do a form for the first time. All right, but not me. Okay, so now the good news is because I don't do the forms, I don't have to do the forms, right? So that's one of the differences. The other thing, of course, is everything is now online.
Yeah.
When I started, you had to read IRPA, and you had to have. We had books, large books with all the previous case histories,
indices and everything.
Yeah, and you bought a new one every year. They were all manuals done by lawyers and about the immigration system and the process. And you would look them up and look at case studies and all of those things and any manuals you had. We had all kinds of manuals you could print. The good part was probably by 1999 some of the things could be available online and you could actually download and print them.
Okay.
But there was no such thing as a website that helped you. Okay. Nowadays.
So accessibility to information has changed.
Nowadays there's much. Yeah. Now the sad part is that IRCC's search engine is the worst thing in the world.
What?
IRCC, if you go in IRCC and you put in you want to find out something about one of the programs, their search engine is horrible.
Yeah.
If you put in permanent residence, spousal application, whatever. You get 50 references to links which have nothing whatsoever to do with what you asked.
Yeah, those are random.
They're just random. It's a terrible, terrible system.
Yes.
But everything else, is gotten to be much nicer. When IRPA first came in, we were worried that it was making things much easier for people to qualify and to do their own files. But we found after about 3 months that IRCC kept changing things. So the further we've gotten from 2002, the harder the system has been to understand, the more complex the programs are, the more nuanced they are. And every time they try to make things easier, it gets harder for regular people.
So many of them. Like I was just going through provincial nominations, and I keep my own master guide. Basically trying to keep everything in order. I mean, every province has about 8 to 10 programs, 12 programs. Like, how do you keep track of everything?
You have to first of all understand the basis behind each of them.
Yeah.
And then you have to keep up to date.
Yeah. Because they keep on changing every time.
Yeah. So. Several provinces will keep changing things. Yeah. It helps to understand the history of the provincial programs.
Yeah.
And what they're going for, but it's not easy. Yeah. And that's why when someone comes to you and they don't qualify for one of the major programs, our ethical responsibility is that we have to recommend the best program for them. Mm-hmm. Now, some people qualify for 4 or 5 or 6 different pathways to a work permit or to permanent residence. Our job isn't to give them one of them that we like. Our job is to review all of the programs available and recommend to them the best one.
Yeah.
So in business immigration, I need to know every business program in Canada. I need to know the federal programs, such as intercompany transfers and treaty investors and C10. You need to know all of those startup visas. If you're going to do this as a subject matter expert, you have to know all the rules, and then you have to keep up to date on them.
And the number of changes these guys introduce every day. Oh my God.
That's right. And so when I first started this business, the number of different processes that we could offer people to immigrate to Canada was probably 1/10 of the number of different programs that we have now. In 2002, for example, previous to 2002, if you wanted to keep your permanent residence, you had to be in Canada 6 months out of every 12.
Oh, okay.
You could not leave the country for more than 6 months unless you had special permission. So people who did leave and didn't come back in time simply lost their permanent residence. Okay. But that meant you could appeal, and you could make a representation that they were, health reasons, whatever. You could try to come back, but it wasn't easy. We all thought that when they came in with a new program saying you had to be in Canada 2 years out of 5, and it was purely mathematical, we all thought, well, we lost that kind of business. Well, within 3 or 4 years, all of a sudden, we're now getting all the cases about people that didn't understand that you had to be in Canada 2 years, didn't understand about renewing your. They
only realized they had to come in the last month of the 5-year period.
Oh, and it's become a significant source of business.
Yeah.
Now we also have citizenship, and the governments have changed citizenship rules 3 or 4 times in the past 15 years. Now you have to, we can offer those services for a lot more. We used to charge $500 to do a citizenship file. Nowadays, to assess it, it's $2,000 to $3,000 and to apply.
Yeah.
We have far more. All the PNP programs, we never had those in the early days. Express entry, the various business immigration programs. There's far more refugee claims, and instead of us getting 150,000 immigrants a year, well, this year's 450,000.
Yeah.
And 800,000 work permits and a million students. I mean, the people have said, listen, you've gone from 800 consultants in 2006 to 12,000 now. Well, yeah, that's a factor of like 20.
Yeah.
Okay, but the number of processes and procedures that you can actually provide services for is probably gone up by a factor of 100.
Yeah.
So we still don't have enough consultants and lawyers who do immigration.
To cover up the demand. That's for sure. But then, when everything is getting so tough, like, we already know that despite Canada inviting almost 500,000 people every year, and the ever-changing rules and everything. So what keeps Phil Mooney up at night? Like, what's the one thing that maybe worries you the most when you go to the office, or keeps you up at night? Maybe, but if you get a good night's sleep, then what's the one thing that you worry about during the day?
Nothing.
Nothing. That's good.
No, because I don't ever get a question I can't answer, or know how to direct people to the right answer. I don't get people coming to me with problems that I don't have an answer to. That's what should happen with subject matter experts. Okay, I don't have a financial worry anymore. Now, I shouldn't say that necessarily, because it's sort of a good news, bad news thing where life expectancy is now, reaching much higher. My mother-in-law passed away recently at 95. My father-in-law was 100. And so now I'm thinking, if I retire, will I run out of money before I'm too old? Well, I think we're okay now, so I don't worry about that anymore. All right. But those are the kind of things you need a job. You need to be able to pay your bills, and you need to be able to support your family, and need to be able to put away money for retirement.
Yeah.
I'm pretty much sure now, now I can think about other things. So there are no business issues that I worry about. None at all.
Okay.
I do worry about that new pain that I felt first thing in the morning, because it's like, geez, why do I hurt there now? But that's just age coming, and I should be trying to be healthier and all those kind of stuff. But I don't have any worries anymore. And
that's a good sign. That's a good news. But yes, overall, in these years, how has the quality of candidates or the applicants, do you think, has changed? Like, versus somebody would have come to you back 20 years, and kind of candidates that you see today, what has been, the change?
The truth is that there aren't any changes.
Okay.
People still are motivated and have the same goals. They want to come to Canada. I don't go out there and find people and convince them to come to Canada. That's one good thing we've never had to do in our profession. We don't have to convince people to come to Canada.
Yeah.
There are always more people who want to come than Canada can accept.
Yeah.
So what we have to do is provide people with the right information on what they need to do to qualify to come to Canada, or to come work in Canada, or to study in Canada. So don't worry about any of those things. And the type of people who want to come, usually they want to come because they want to live here.
Yeah.
And it isn't so much the fact that in some countries, life is so much better in Canada than there. It's that there are certain types of people in every country who want the adventure, or who want their own personal circumstances, say they're not satisfied with what they're doing, and they want the opportunity to come live in Canada. And Canada has some advantages. Not everybody will come here. There are other people who won't come here. But the same kind of people in 25 years are the ones who wanted to come here. Right. And the fact of the matter is, the world population is now double what it was 25 years ago.
Yeah.
And of that population, most of them are even are better off.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a geopolitical reality, that we've had 50 years of progress with something like 1 billion fewer people are poor, are below the poverty line. Famine is gone. So we don't think about immigration now as people who are desperate to come. We do have refugee programs, and we get a certain number there, but the vast majority of people want to come here to make a living here, that's better for them and their kids, in their opinion. And that opinion can be based on where they live, what they've done, who their family is.
That's correct.
They like or don't like a government. We get all kinds of reasons, but it's up to them.
Yeah.
And so I don't see any difference in the kind of people coming here. It's just they're from different countries.
Yeah.
And the system has deflected, or it used to be that our number one country was China.
Yeah.
When the system became much more demanding in terms of language, well, that Chinese immigration petered off, and it's English-speaking countries now, like India, Philippines, Nigeria. They're the ones that seem to have. They're the major source countries because of language. I don't necessarily agree that that's a good thing. I don't think everyone has to speak English.
That's correct.
To come here.
Yeah.
But the department, that's one of the things they've been insisting on, because even with the express entry system, it was set up for some very specific reasons. But the profile of individuals who could come here who were young, highly educated, excellent English or French, matches the profile of every government employee that's ever hired. Okay, so they didn't pick out people who are the best people to come to Canada. They picked out people who look like them. Okay, and it's only recently that's been changed now with coming by occupation. So I think the same people, we don't see as many people coming from China. We don't see people coming from South Africa the same way. And the number one country is India, but that's changing already because of other things that have happened. So it's going to change from year to year. But the reasons people in any of those countries want to come are the same.
Still going to be the same.
Yeah.
That's correct. Well, talking about governments, when you mentioned, well, I don't have any political opinions, but just talking about pure facts, like if, going by the current opinions and polls and whatever, if there is a change of government, if the Conservatives come into power, and because you've seen, change of governments, if the Conservatives get into power, what kind of changes can one expect with regards to immigration?
Yeah, mostly none. Because the one thing that the immigration programs from Canada are designed, developed, justified by the department.
Okay.
And what the department likes is to be experts on immigration.
Okay.
And to decide what's best for Canada. And the only people who can overrule them is the immigration minister. And the government has this habit of changing immigration ministers every year. And so what you rarely get is an immigration minister that starts to tell the department what to do.
Okay.
And I can think of in the past 20 years, there's 15 or so immigration ministers come here. There's only one who actually changed and ran the department and put in policies that he wanted to see.
Okay.
And that was Jason Kenney.
Okay.
And he was immigration minister for like 4 years, which meant he knew things and he had specific ideas he wanted to enact, and the department, eventually had to basically do what he wanted them to do.
Okay.
Almost every other immigration minister, by the time they get familiar with how things work,
They change
the minister. And they've done that recently. Now, the newest minister that we have, Minister Miller, appears to be someone who can make decisions.
Yeah.
It's hard when you get a new minister, the department just keeps making their decisions. The Minister Miller has actually now made a lot of hard decisions about students, about other programs that are not working, about new programs to adjust to. They're talking about other programs that they might bring into place about individuals who are in the country without status, and he seems to be at least one who is prone to make decisions. So we'll see how long he's minister.
Yeah.
Now, when a new government comes in, the policies didn't change very much between the Liberals and the Conservatives back when Stephen Harper became Prime Minister or when Justin Trudeau became Prime Minister, with a few exceptions. When Justin Trudeau came in, he immediately addressed the Syrian refugee issue and said, we're getting 50,000 people in. That was a leadership position. When and if another immigration minister comes in, I can't imagine him changing much of anything.
Okay.
In terms of the way the program goes. You would think that the Conservatives would be more amenable towards business immigration, but actually the last Conservative government presided over the demise of most business immigration programs federally.
Okay.
They canceled the federal investor program. They canceled the federal entrepreneur program. The provinces have put in their own programs, and it didn't matter which government or which party was running them. They've all changed their programs according to different rules. So to me, immigration has always been a non-political thing until lately, when the government had too many people coming into Canada, and that's created some backlash.
Okay.
But until then, and I think moving forward, immigration itself, if you make it an issue, you can't win votes with it, but you can lose votes. If you come in with some very strong, new, innovative immigration policies, you're probably going to lose a lot more votes than you get just because of the change. So the parties have generally stayed away from immigration during an election campaign as any kind of an issue. And the current situation is going to change before the next election. Right now the big story has to do with how many temporary residents there are in Canada.
Yeah.
But even when and before the government started making it tougher to get a student visa or limit the number of temporary residents in Canada, there has already been a big, let's call it, change in the market, in that the study permits have now been reduced to half, number one. But even that wasn't the big factor. The big factor was the problems in India and the problems of the political problems between Canada and India, which have not gone away, with regards to the murder of the Sikh activist, and the Indian government is not happy with Canada's position on all that. And individuals within India have become more and more aware of the fraud and the various ways that you can get to be a permanent resident through the study permit program are now mostly closed, and most of those are being taken advantage of by Indian students. So you're going to see a massive drop-off in students in the next 6 months, starting by September. You're already seeing it. We're going to see a massive drop-off in temporary foreign workers simply because of the economy. Now, the economy itself, the number of job vacancies has dropped substantially. The unemployment rate has gone up a little bit. We still need foreign workers, and we need enough foreign workers to take advantage, to take the vacancies being created by baby boomers retiring.
Yeah.
We still have a need in many professions for them, but in total, the numbers will start to drop. So a year from now, prior to the next election, people are going to start saying, well, the population of Canada just only went up, 0.7% instead of 3% or 2% that had happened before, because the total number of temporary residents is going to come down fast. So as an issue, people are going to look back and all that the one party can say is, well, they brought in too many people. Yeah, but if the problem's solved, and now we're having fewer people come in, where's the problem, right? So I predict that immigration probably won't be an issue moving forward, okay? The issue of people coming in across the border has changed drastically, with the changes to the Safe Third Country Act. The issue with too many students coming in has changed drastically. The issues with companies bringing in more and more workers under LMIAs is dropping. And with the drop of students graduating, with fewer students graduating in the next couple of years, we're going to see a far lower number of open work permits, which is one of the largest area of types of immigration programs that people can take advantage of, because if you have people who are on postgrad work permits and they get married, they can bring in their spouses. If you have people with work permits under LMIAs, well, they can bring in their spouses mostly. And that was a good idea when we came to the end of COVID, where we had a definite shortage in so many fields that making sure there were lots of people coming here who could work helped the Canadian economy recover. But now that the economy stabilized and might even slip back a bit in terms of jobs, we're going to see a lot of those jobs go away. Okay. And I can see that happening. And in 5 years, the whole issue of the number of baby boomers retiring, we're now at the point where more than half of the people who are defined as baby boomers have retired. And by 2030, they're pretty well all retired, and the next generation coming along is one of the smallest.
Yeah.
So we won't have to replace so many workers. So the government's got to look at policies over the next 5-6 years that will deal with the issue of job vacancies. And their first step was to make the express entry system be one that fills shortages in specific places. Once they've filled those, and we're already getting signs that for construction workers, which is one of the areas they want to recruit more or bring in more permanent residents as construction workers, for them, there are now studies that say we have more construction workers in the country than we have demand, just that they're not matched up very well. So we'll still bring in some, but you can start to see that soon. The same thing will happen with healthcare workers. Once we bring in enough nurses and nurses assistants and personal support workers and doctors, we'll reach the point where we're meeting the needs of the economy, and then that will slow down again. Truck drivers seem to be a little harder because the overall economy in Canada, the US are growing, and we need more transportation.
Yeah.
So those are the kind of things that are going to happen going forward. All of them will leave us with what I believe the biggest problem, and that is, what do you do with 1 million people in Canada who have no path to permanent residence? Yes, some of them will leave. Yes, a few of them will get deported. But the vast majority are desperate for ways to stay here.
What do you think will happen to them?
Well, you're going to see some reasonable number marry Canadians, okay? Because there just happen to be a lot of young people working here, and young people meet young people, and the last thing they ask is, what's your status? If two people meet, when one of them turns out to be Canadian, one's not, they'll get married, right? Or they'll live together and they'll be sponsored through the family class. Then there will be fraudulent marriages. There will be fraudulent refugee claims. We're looking at that with all of the Ukrainian people who've
already started to happen.
There's going to be a marked rise in all of those. But even that's not going to be enough. You're going to have a whole lot of people whose choice is to leave Canada or stay living in Canada and working under the counter. And working for employers or family members who will pay them, and just making sure they don't get caught. And they have a reasonable chance of staying here because Canada doesn't, we don't, stop people on the street and demand to see their status.
Yeah.
We have individual rights, but there's not a whole lot. We don't want to pay a whole lot of policemen to go out there and try to find who's here illegally. So we do have, and I put together a policy paper that said there is a way to deal with that. And part of that will mean we need to change how work permits are treated. People on work permits are treated. The Senate Committee on Immigration just put out a major report that recommended that we get rid of closed work permits.
Yes, I was about to ask you that question. What do you think should be done with the closed work permits?
Well, they want to just convert closed work permits to open work permits because they believe that workers on closed work permits are being abused by employers. They're threatened. They don't necessarily understand that if they have a 3-year work permit, if they don't like their job, they can leave and they can stay in the country for 3 years. There are unscrupulous employers who threaten them to have them deported. There are all kinds of problems like that. And so people are desperate to stay. And the Senate said, look, we're seeing far more abusive workers, both in terms of their employment roles, sexual abuse, physical abuse, financial abuse, that it doesn't justify the idea of a closed work permit. Meanwhile, employers are saying, hey, we're paying money to bring these people into Canada. It's expensive for us. And so if we bring them in and they can change jobs right away, what's the problem? Well, the pendulum seems to be swinging in favor of what the Senate committee wants. And they want to stop having these be open work permits. So I think there's an even better way.
Okay.
The idea is that we set up everyone who gets a work permit, regardless of what it is, gets something called conditional permanent residence.
Okay.
They have all of the benefits of being a permanent resident, except they can't accrue time towards citizenship initially. Okay. So someone comes into here under an intercompany transfer or under a NAFTA visa or CUSMA, or they come in and they get a study permit and a post-grad work permit, and all of those people that currently are on work permits, they get an LMIA because their job's still necessary. They all get a work permit that's based on, and they're given conditional permanent residence. And they're told, okay, if you're on conditional permanent residence and you work in Canada for 5 years out of 7, you can then have the condition removed.
Okay.
Now you're on your path to citizenship. If you're in a low skilled, that would be for high skilled workers.
Yeah.
Or high paid workers. If you're a low skilled, it's 7 years.
Okay.
Okay. If you keep working as let's say a maid in a hotel who's cleaning rooms, because we don't have enough people to do that, but you've had that job for the last 7 years, then you automatically qualify. It doesn't matter about language. It doesn't matter about education. Okay. In the meantime, during the years that you're working in Canada, if you get married to a Canadian, if you qualify for express entry, great. You will give you extra points every year because you have had another 1 year work experience. If you set up a business in Canada and you come here under a business program, same thing. Just because you might not have the best English language skills or whatever, if you can set up a business and sustain it for 5 years, you should have enough points then to qualify under express entry.
Yeah.
So instead of saying it's all open work permits, it's conditional permanent residence. Then the condition is after X number of years, you can start to accumulate points towards citizenship. If if you're gone or you leave the country for more than 6 months, the calendar starts all over again. Okay. You have to get another work permit to come back to Canada. In the final analysis, after 12 years, if you've been in Canada, you didn't accumulate your work permit time and enough time, and you didn't have any other path to permanent residence, then just because you've been here 12 years, we'll give you permanent residence as long as you did not enter the country illegally.
Yeah.
Because sometimes, people get married, they have kids, they can't work full time, they have all kinds of different reasons, but as long as they don't commit a crime, as long as they don't claim welfare during those years, they're underground, if you will, for 12 years, but they did enter legally.
Yeah.
Right? We never, ever should allow people who enter the country illegally to qualify for permanent residence or any other status except for agency.
Yeah.
Or refugee status. Sometimes people come in with false documents because they're going to claim, they're from Syria or they're from Sudan or places that are terrible right now, or from Gaza. Yeah. If they can get false documents, they can come into Canada and claim refugee status. Yeah. That's fine.
Yeah.
But if people are just coming in to be economic refugees and they come into Canada just and work illegally, and they cross over sail across the Great Lakes or go through the forest illegally, any of those people should not be eligible under any circumstance, and the government should be looking for them all the time, and they should be deported once they're caught.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly what UK is trying to do.
Yes. And again, if they start, and they've been talking now, and the minister's talking about undocumented workers.
Yeah.
Again, if those undocumented workers, after a long period of time, and I think they're talking like 12 years or 15 years, whatever, I understand that. But if any of them entered Canada illegally,
they should not.
If you say that even those people can get permanent residence, you're going to get a flood of more people.
Yeah.
Because over the 30 years up until IRPA 2022, there were 4 or 5 different amnesties declared, and after each one, the number who came in illegally went up. So to me,
it becomes a motivating factor for people that
they're going to come here because they know if they stay long enough, and we shouldn't ever underestimate the fact that people who are desperate would rather live here illegally, okay, than live where they live.
Yeah.
And that's understandable. Now, there are lots of countries in the world where that applies to. But if they know that whenever they come here, they can't stay, okay, then that discourages people from ever getting approved.
Yeah, because they know even if they find their way around the laws, like even if they get married to somebody,
that's right,
they will still not get it because
that's right,
the way they entered was not.
And they're going to have to leave Canada and then get an ARC to come back to Canada, application to return to Canada, meet that requirement, like a failed refugee claim and all of that stuff. They have to leave. And that means the government can, and the CBSA and those people on enforcement can focus on those people. And I think they're all working under the counter. They'll never have a T4 slip, never have a social insurance number. So it's going to be easier and easier to find those people because everything is turning into more digital work.
Yeah. It's, considering the increasing complexity of work permits and people not being qualified under students and whatnot. What do you think, as they're saying that they will stop issuing closed work permits and they'll stop bringing in students? And while they do this, they say that the immigration system is broken. Like, I'm not sure if you follow a lot of this flag on social media, but people are always saying that the immigration system of Canada is broken and they don't have the right policies, everything. If such was the case, as per you, first question is this the case? Do you think it's broken? And if it is, what can be done to fix this? Like, should they stop temporary residence altogether, or should they be focusing on conditional permanent residence? Like you said, inviting only permanent residents, probably putting them on a pathway. What do you think is the truth?
So they should recognize, first of all, that there will always be some problems with people who are desperate to come to Canada and other people who are seeking to make money and abuse the system. We'll never get a perfect system.
Yeah.
But even now, the system is working.
Yeah.
The system for permanent residence means we're getting qualified people to come into Canada who meet closer to what the economy needs on economic side. Family reunification programs are working. Those and the systems that we now use to help them come to Canada are going to get better in another year or two. Okay. Again, we have to say that you can't say the system is broken just because of anecdotes.
Yeah.
Well, we have to go back and look at what happened after COVID.
Yeah.
I mean, the immigration system was functioning with some like 65 visa posts who had a role to play, 100 and some visa application centers, and 10, maybe 5 or 10 processing centers in Canada. They were handling something like 8 million different applications a year. So it's a factory, okay? It's processing all of those things. They had weaknesses in their system in terms of IT systems weren't up to date. They had policy issues. They were changing too often. There were those kind of issues that they were leaving. Along comes COVID. And unlike most other countries, COVID destroyed the plant.
Okay.
They took all of this people in the 65 embassies and consulates and brought them all back to Canada, all of them. And they sent everybody home, locally engaged staff at every visa post, and they might have left 1 or 2 people to handle security issues. Everybody left. All of the people working in Ottawa and the various processing centers all went home. So you had a system that didn't have any way to function and to process files except people coming in at the border who were allowed to come in during COVID. But then even they had to jump through extra hoops. And the number of people coming to Canada dropped precipitously. So for the first 6 months, it didn't look like anything was happening because nobody could come in anyway. So the system didn't look overworked. But after 6 months, and I think it was September of 2020, when COVID started in February of 2020 in March. Then all the curfews, all the restrictions came in. In September, they eased up on the people who could come to Canada.
Yeah.
Was it September of 2021?
21.
When we all had vaccines, everything started. They opened up the door to people who could come. And they got buried in the number of applications.
Yeah.
Meantime, the staff who had been sent home, most of them weren't even working.
Yeah.
Because the first thing they found out when they went home is they said, you could do all your work from home. Nobody had a computer that met their privacy rules.
Yeah.
They couldn't work on their own computers. And then eventually the government started sending out, but it took them another 3 months to figure out what computers they should send out to their people. and they eventually said to people, go out there and buy a computer that does this, this, and this. And the people outside said, why should we trust you?
Yeah.
You can't even pay us because of the previous scandal with the Phoenix pay program, that has been going on for 8-10 years. People didn't trust the government. So it just took a long time for some of them to start processing. And then they started to try and use IT to put in Band-Aids, if you will, to support the process. And many of those things, because of the underlying IT process and weaknesses, failed. So finally in 2023 in the summer, they announced like $80-90 million in IT programs. That's going to take another couple of years. And as consultants, we know, we see the failures weekly in terms of the portals they have.
Oh, yes.
And we've had to try and, live through that. There are still half of all the employees are not working in downtown Ottawa or in Edmonton, at their offices, or they haven't gone back to the visa posts. Their union is, fighting to say we don't need to work from a local office. The government's mandating some of it. They're still not operating at full capacity. So the system itself, just in terms of processing, has been a problem, and their band-aids that they brought in, including things like Chinook, and other AI processes, are causing more troubles, meaning more appeals, more federal court appeals. We're still living through that process for the next year, I think, and eventually, I believe they will finally have the resources to process files again properly.
Yeah.
Okay. So what people need is to know how to navigate the system, and that's where authorized representatives, lawyers, and consultants come in.
Yeah,
that's our job, and they're going to need even more advice because all of us who work in that, and I talk. Luckily, I don't have to do any of that kind of stuff. I'm happy, But everybody who works in them, it's extra work, it's extra frustration. Well, for people who are doing the files themselves, it's even harder.
Yeah.
And the number of refusals are more. So there's going to be a real demand for good advice, helping out with dealing with the process. So what we need on a temporary basis or an interim basis is to address the needs of the people who are going to be here. Over the last 2 years, we what do we have, like 800,000 to 1 million students come in.
Yeah.
Right now they're in school.
Yeah.
Then they're all going to have 1 to 3 year work permits. By the time they finish, there's so many of them won't have a path to permanent residence. So that gives us the chance. If we come in with the interim process where they get a work permit, and that means they get conditional permanent residence, over the next 5 to 10 years, they get absorbed into the immigration system. So of the 500,000 that we're going to take next year, and each year, let's say, goes up even a bit more each year, it's going to take 5 or 6 years, and maybe we're not going to be able to bring in quite as many express entry applicants or P&P applicants. Now, one of the main people who would complain about more immigration is Quebec now, because they have a government that is not in favor of numbers in immigration, because they can't control the fact that a lot of them are not French speaking.
Yeah.
So government doesn't have to worry about cutting down on more, qualified people, and instead approving people who are already in Canada, through the conditional permanent residence. And so I think we've got opportunities there.
Yeah.
And the government can see, by giving people hope that they will come in as conditional permanent residents and they can change jobs all they need and want as they go through their careers and businesses, and they get promoted. Those people actually know that if it takes 5 years, at least there's a PR at the end of it, or 8 years or something like that.
Yeah.
There is a path. So then that means, but if you're going to do that, you can't violate immigration law, and you can't break the law. You can't
go to
rob
jail,
a bank, and
drink and drive.
Yeah, you can't do any of those things. So, we already know that those individuals have a much lower crime rate than anybody else.
Yeah.
Others don't. Okay. I mean, they will be fine. So I think that's a solution to the problem going forward. And I've submitted a policy paper into CAPIC, who's, hopefully we'll be submitting that to the government, and going any other way. To me, it doesn't matter to me. I think after we think about it properly, take the consent, the research that the Senate did, and the abuse taken. Now, for employers who have to recruit people, their job should be to either train or hire Canadians or people in Canada, including, all these extra graduates and all this stuff, train them and to hire them for their needs. And if they can't get enough people that way because their business is expanding, whatever, then they spend the money on bringing people here. And when they get here, they're going to justify to every employee they should stay with them. Not the people who are abuse their workers, and they're worried that if the workers come in, they are going to leave, go somewhere else. I mean, if they offer a job that's crap, they should be hired. They should expect to lose their employees. So they have to either pay them more.
Yeah,
and I think that answers a whole lot of criticism about who's immigrants drop push wages down, which is not true. But it could be that by embracing people, innovation may not be tattered. Although, again, even though we can think about AI and all these things, how are you going to probably automate a hotel maid?
Yeah, there's no way to do that.
And cooks and servers, to people at a Michelin restaurant.
Yeah.
Whose the experience is you have a waiter who deals with you properly. Their food is exceptional. Are you AI is going to change that? No. Are you going to have a robot to do that? No. Okay. So, we need to make sure that there are some segments of the industry where they might be low skilled, but they're in demand. No matter what the employment rate is, whatever, those individuals are demanded in Canada. So they should have a path to permanent residence, over time. And the amount of time they work and live in Canada becomes a substitute for education and language under the Express Entry program.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting thought. I would definitely, wait for that policy paper to make good impact. And I hope we are able to see some good changes in the policies. Well, Phil, thanks a lot for joining us on the show today. It was lovely talking to you and your insights on Canadian immigration.
I appreciate it. I do have to make sure I mention a commercial, about co-counseling.
Oh, yes, for sure.
That the idea of co-counseling is not the same as mentoring that our regulator is now introducing so for new consultants. Co-counseling is to help our members, lawyers and consultants, frankly, to monetize the investment, the inquiries they get from people who have a path to work permits, study permits into Canada, but those paths are not familiar to the consultant. Well, we can monetize that. Most of these people have worked hard to be licensed. They get education, they study, they change their careers. They are investing in their occupation of an authorized representative, and when they get a lead, they need to monetize that. Okay. Well, we can help monetize events in areas that if they want to expand their business into them or just take the opportunity as one. And so all they have to do is go to our website, immc3.ca, register, and then say, I have a prospect. We then we typically share fees. It's half and half for the first one and maybe 20% out of the second one, until you know what you're doing, and then you do them all. You don't need us anymore. It's all voluntary. It's all treated under our code of ethics. So it's simple.
Yeah.
The fees are shared after you get the money from the client. If the client submits you whatever the client gives you in terms of a payment in professional fees, what the net of that is after whatever fees there might be that you have to pay, then we go half and half on that or some percentage thereof, depending on what type of the process is. So feel free, answer those requirements. That same website will then hopefully provide you with the right tools.
Yeah.
We have templates for most of everything, and you get a senior or an expert, a subject matter expert to help you with whatever process it is that you need help on. So that's the commercial.
Perfect. That's very useful. It's for a lot of people in the practice. Like I've used that particular part, and I've already gotten a lot of help from you. But I can totally vouch for it, and I hope people like me do get a lot of help from you.
Well, thank you very much. I'm looking very much
Perfect.
forward to your publication of this interview, and
Perfect.
feel free to edit as much as you can. And I do need you to make sure you put in the filters that make me look younger and thinner. Okay?
You're already very young.
Yeah. Yeah, just make it younger and thinner, okay?
Okay, we'll do so.
All right. Thank you so much, Sahil.
Thanks for
Take
joining
care.
in. Thank you.